Hi, I'm Lorraine Ollie from the Los Angeles Times, and I'm here today with Kate Beckinsale from Amazon's The Widow. Welcome.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here.
It's nice to be
Even
here.
if I just lost my voice for just a second, but I'm happy to have you
Okay,
here.
I won't scare you any more than I already have.
Terrified. I just wanted to jump right in and talk about The Widow.
Okay.
It's such a great suspenseful series, and I can kind of just give for our, the audience just a little snippet of what it's about. But your character, Georgia,
Yeah.
we're visiting her 3 years after she believes her husband died in a plane crash,
Yeah.
correct? And then,
Yeah, and she's living a very depressed, very isolated life in rural Wales, and then she ends up in a doctor's office and happens to see some news footage in Africa and thinks she sees a glimpse of her husband and is really thrown by that, but also can't quite let go of what if it was him. And then all sorts of mayhem ensues.
Yes.
African mayhem ensues.
she goes through
Yeah, she really does.
hell and back.
Yeah.
It's such a strong character, but also she's really vulnerable. I mean, she's very believable because she's got all sorts of flaws and vulnerabilities, but she's super strong as well.
I think what I really liked is that when you find her at the beginning in the lowest ebb, incredibly depressed, pretty socially anxious, withdrawn from everything, not doing her job, and just kind of surviving, and then has to really, just the getting on a plane, I think, is a huge deal for her, let alone everything that ends up happening in a country she's not familiar with all sorts of kind of political things that she doesn't understand and knows nothing about, and gets herself in some real scrapes out there. So it is quite a nice thing to start with somebody who's at their most vulnerable and then does have to kind of find reserves that they may or may not end up having.
Right. So in shooting this, you actually were in South Africa,
Yeah,
correct?
6 months, yeah.
So, but then you were going back and forth between South Africa. Weren't you going to Wales or?
We didn't really do a lot back and forth. We were in South Africa for their summer, which was really shocking and hot, and we were all kind of really learning how to survive and run around and act while pouring sweat and fainting and all that. And then suddenly we had our couple of weeks shooting in Wales right after that, which was when they had the beast from the east snow blizzard.
Oh.
And so it was a huge shock. I mean, we really were kind of like, being British, 1 minute you're complaining about how hot you are, and the next minute you're complaining about how cold you are. And that's, that's a real goal for an English person, to get to
Right.
complain the whole spectrum in a couple of days.
But so for you, I mean, it's not you've done so much. First off, looking at your career, it is so
Schizophrenic.
it's schizophrenic and it's exciting. I mean, you have done just about everything, from period dramas, action films, comedies, now the suspenseful TV. I have to say, you really seem to challenge yourself, and that is, I don't know. Do you feel like that's something you need to do to keep yourself?
I do. I think the thing, I always felt when I went to Oxford and studied Russian and French. I didn't go to a drama school, and I remember thinking when I started working, so I started working professionally quite young, I must treat this like an apprenticeship. I've got to kind of get good at everything. I want to go and do theatre, and I need to go and do this kind of thing. I must do a film in an American accent, or maybe shoot in French, or so I really thought of it like that, and I've sort of stayed like that. And the things that have come my way, I mean, the other thing people don't realise is you're not sitting there going, I'm picking from every single movie there is, I pick this one. You have a certain, list that you can choose. But I have always found it, part of what I like about the job is to go, right, I maybe suck at running, so now I'm going to try and play an action hero, and let's see how that goes. And sometimes those things can take off, it can feel like a huge stretch to you, and then the next minute people think that's your big thing that you're good at, and that can feel very weird. But I've been now doing it for 205 years, so I think I think the nice thing is now it feels like there's just a lot of different interesting experiences I've had, rather than kind of worrying about getting stuck somewhere.
Right. Well, how do you do that? For instance, like you're saying, you can do one thing that you've never done before and you do it well, and people all of a sudden think that's your thing, right?
Yeah.
So when you kind of want to, you want to keep challenging yourself and breaking out.
Yeah.
How do you reach for the next role? In other words, you're not picking and going, I'm going to do a drama this time. Or
Yeah.
how does that
Sometimes
work?
what it means is that you end up not working for a period of time and saying no to more of the same things that you're sort of trying to slightly go in a different direction from. But on the whole, I've been quite lucky in that. I think when I first started, in England, that we were making a lot of period dramas and Jane Austens, and I just sort of went right into that and Shakespeare and stuff. And so that felt like my kind of ground level, that's where I fit. And anyone since then who's taken a chance on me, whether it was Whit Stillman saying, I believe you can play an American when I'd only ever been to Disneyland once for 3 days, or, whatever, or, I believe you can be a believable vampire jumping off a building, when I, at that time in my life, would do nearly anything to avoid running for a bus, unless I was, literally being chased. So it's very much a kind of thing between the person having a vision of you that you've not necessarily thought of either.
What do you think? Do you think that was one of your more challenging roles? I mean, what do you consider? Well, doing like Underworld or doing some of the things that were more physically challenging? Or
that
what
was
do you
very
feel?
much not my sensibility at all.
Yeah.
So there was a period of time after having done a couple of those where I felt really odd, because the reason I did that in the first place was I had come out here and people kept saying, well, she's very sort of soft and fragile and English, and we can smell crumpets when she comes in the room, and don't really think she can play a cop or anything with like a real edge. And I thought, well, I must take care of that. And then very luckily got handed this thing, thinking I'm going to get fired. There's no way I can do this. And then that became so defining that then within a year or two it was like, well, she's a bit tough. She looks like she'd go at you with a baseball bat. And I was like, wow, that was fast. It was a very quick change, and it can be like that. But like I say, I think as long as you manage not to actually die, you can live through a few incarnations of yourself.
Right. Right. I mean, how have you seen the roles for women changing, just in terms of like strong female leads?
Yeah.
It just seems like I would say TV is probably in a better place than film is.
Yeah,
But
I
it just
agree.
seems like there is more and more out there. I mean, is that what you see, and is that what you're
I'd say I've
experiencing?
always been drawn to that, and I think starting out with classic literature, being sort of turned into films or television, if you're playing Emma, if you're playing, a Shakespeare character, you're very lucky, because this is an amazingly well-drawn literary character. So I started out really lucky like that. But then, yes, in general, the film stuff, I never really wanted to be the girl who sort of hung around and then suddenly took a shower. We've all ended up, unfortunately, getting forced and threatened into doing that. But I think I remember when Underworld was first a thing, there was a huge level of terror with the production companies because it was a female lead. And, is it just that Sigourney Weaver and Linda Hamilton were lucky flukes? And does anyone actually really want to see that? And they were very concerned about that. And I know, it seems like quite a long time, obviously, it's however many years ago it was. But in the grand scheme of things, I know if my daughter's generation of actresses won't hear that conversation, because, there have been a few of us who have made a lot of like, whether they're franchises or Wonder Woman has been so brilliant, or Mad Max, whatever. I think people have become much more used to, and quite hungry for seeing women in that capacity. So it feels nice to have been a tiny part of moving that needle in a reasonably short period of time.
Yeah. And I would have to say, my son, who watches, superhero movies, watches Captain Marvel, Supergirl, doesn't think twice
they don't
about
question it.
So
But
even the boys,
yes, exactly.
yes,
No one's really
right.
questioning it, and I think that's, unfortunately, the reason for that is that they made money. It's a completely, because they made money, we're now allowed to have strong female characters. So, but I think for women and for men, I think I remember going and seeing Thelma and Louise in the movie theatre. I can't remember what age I was, and coming out and thinking, I could leap tall buildings. It was so rare that you'd have that feeling coming out of a movie. So I do think that there are more things like that for us. Yeah.
Right. I felt the same way.
Okay.
So getting back to The Widow, because you've, much of your career has been film.
Yeah.
And you haven't relatively done a lot of television.
No, not for a long time anyway.
Right. So what, are you able to, because this is 8 episodes, is that right?
Yeah.
So, are you able to like do more character development? I mean, what are the differences in moving into television?
I have to say what it feels like, and it's, whatever kind of movie you're doing, it's the same prep really. It feels like a really long movie that, that's what it feels like. But what's nice about it is that, you have 8 hours to explore a character. You can go into their backstory, you can go into their past, you can go flashback, you can really see them over, an extended period of time. So you really get a chance to really dig in, which, with somebody who is sort of as emotionally damaged and challenged as this character was great.
Yeah.
Kind of needed the 8 hours.
Yes. And you also got to work with Charles Dance.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love him.
I've worked with him a couple of times. I think my first paid job, which was someone handing me £10 in cash, was some very low-key thing that my mum and him were doing. And they needed a 10-year-old girl for. So my mum went, well, I've got one, and they played my parents in something, and I ruined it by getting hiccups, and nobody liked it. I mean, it was a disaster. But then he was in Underworld, one of the Underworlds, and this was our third actually go around. So it was quite nice because they've got a kind of avuncular paternal relationship in this, and I feel like he's known me since I was 10. So
oh my gosh! Wow. Okay, well, are you a Game of Thrones fan?
I have a hard time with disemboweling animals to really depressing music, but I'm committing going forward. Okay. Because also I feel really left out.
How far are you?
I mean, season 1. I mean, the music really kind of got me down, and then there was a lot of slitting bellies open. But I'm gonna get better at handling it.
Yeah, there's that. There is. I'm just going to warn you. There's plenty more. I know I know you've heard a little about it.
Yeah,
but
I have. No, I feel very much out of the conversation because people are freaking out today, and I'm not. So.
Okay. All right. So, when you are doing downtime, relaxing, are you watching television? Are you watching films, or you just like stay away from that?
No, I think what I love about TV and in particular TV is that if you are having a low moment, or you're like when we were in South Africa getting to the end of shooting and like homesick and away from, lonely or whatever, and you can sort of hold yourself together through 6 or 8 or 10 hours of something that, in a tragic way becomes your kind of, your on the screen family and, whatever. I just love that there's that for people. I like to have given people that, and it was nice. I've definitely abused that. Also because I've lived away from home. I'm from England and I live here. I'll find myself from some really deep dives watching English television programs that I would never watch ever if I was there and would actively leave the room. But you get attracted to a kind of very low common denominator when you're away. So like if you were in England, you probably really want a Twinkie.
I did.
And you'd never want one here. It's like that.
Yes.
But with everything, so everything. So I think I'd be too embarrassed to say what I actually watch because it's not reflective of my real self, but I'm very attracted to watching the lowest grade English television there is.
Really? Can you say one? I will tell you one of my worst things, like if you will tell me.
This is a journalistic move. Go on then.
Okay, I'm a television critic. I should really be watching, the top.
Yes.
The top. I do enjoy some things on the ID channel. Okay, so I could say a name, perhaps Wives with Knives. Okay, I said it.
Really, that's a thing? I need to go and find it immediately. That sounds so up my alley.
We were
Wives
just
with
talking
Knives?
about Homicide for the Holidays. That's also one.
I'm obsessed with crime shows. What was that? There was that show where it was always women running over their husbands in the driveway.
Snapped.
Yes, Snapped, but the voiceover was very nasal. That put me off. So
Yes.
I like English crimes. I feel weirdly at home watching English serial killers. I've said too much.
Okay.
Or naked dating shows. There's a program in England which shocks all Americans, where you pick a person, but they're in a perspex box, and you start at the bottom and sort of reject them based on the naked areas of their body. I mean, it's like Gladiators. It's horrific. But just the sheer joy of videoing it on your iPhone and sending it to an unsuspecting American has been hours of fun for me.
I wanted to ask you some questions, which is our lightning round.
Oh,
okay?
no. Would it have to be things I remember, or people's names?
It's going to have to be the capitals, states.
Oh,
and
no.
countries.
Oh, I will
Yeah,
fail.
you know that,
Geography's my
right?
worst thing ever.
No, it should be things that,
I might know.
there's nothing super tricky in here,
Okay.
I think. Okay. The first is, what is the last show you binge watched?
Ricky Gervais' Afterlife is the one I'll admit to.
Okay, all right. Oh, see, now we already kind of went over this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Who's going to win Game of Thrones?
Really couldn't tell you anyone's name in Game of Thrones.
But you've
at all.
watched season 1,
A
so
dragon is. Are they in there? A dragon's involved? Because I'd put my money on a dragon.
Should I give you a spoiler and tell you that they are or aren't involved? I
mean, I'm open to dragons. I'm open to
Okay.
them being involved. I'm going to say dragon.
A dragon's going to win. Okay, all right. What classic TV show would you have loved to be on?
I remember because my father was a very well-known actor in England and like super well-known on television. And I remember being about 7 or 8 and realizing the downside of having a famous parent was that you'd never be on, we called it Family Fortunes, but they called it Family Feud. And I remember feeling like incredibly disenfranchised by that.
Was it was a sitcom or was
No,
it
for him that he was on?
No, the show that
No,
you...
it was our version of Family Feud.
Oh, okay.
And I
see what
suddenly
you're saying.
went, they don't have famous people on that. Wow, we're screwed.
So you would go back and do that? That would be
I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind going on that. But when you said you would be in a drama, in an actual playing a part.
Yes, classic TV show. That can be it.
American TV show.
It can be British too. It can be either.
I don't know. Let's say Family Feud.
All right. Let's say it's something with dragons. How about that?
Okay.
Where dragons
Deal.
win. Okay.
Yeah.
What's the worst job you've ever had? And it can't be this round table right now.
It isn't this.
No.
No, it isn't this. It's the worst job I ever had. I mean, I've only really done this, acting,
Okay.
or I was a very poor babysitter for a minute,
no.
and I worked in a clothing store for 2 days. And I thought I was going to get to operate the till, which is what I wanted to do, the cash register. But they just made me wear the clothes and stand near the window, and I was miserable. So it's not really that bad. Nothing, not like a morgue attendant or anything.
But that's like being put on display.
Didn't really like, and it was also really boring.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. What has you more excited, the Sopranos prequel or the Breaking Bad sequel that are in production?
Oh God, that's quite a tough one. But both very excited.
Right.
Maybe Breaking Bad. Is Bryan Cranston in the sequel?
I can't answer that.
Oh.
Let's
Call yourself
just say he is.
If he is, maybe that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm quite excited about both of them.
That's like choosing between your children. That seems
So
unfair.
it does seem unfair.
Yeah, these questions
Did you come up with that?
No, I did not.
Sadist.
It's these people off camera here that came up with these. Yeah, totally unfair.
All of them have personality disorders.
Well, I think that is it.
That's
We
it.
have wrapped
You found
up.
out what you need to know.
I found out
Yeah.
everything I needed to know. I do want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
So, if the acting thing had not worked out,
Yeah.
what do you think you would have ended up
I'd
doing?
like to have been a doctor. I still wish I was a doctor. I'm just phobic of vomit. And that was really the only obstacle for me. Because at some point as a doctor, someone's going to surprisingly vomit on you.
Right.
So that's what really clinched it, which is sad. Because I don't mind, if someone's going to start bleeding to death, I'll absolutely put my finger in the hole. Like I'm very good in a crisis, unless someone's vomiting. And then I'm out. And I don't think that's good doctor behaviour.
Okay.
So.
And I think we should end on that note.
Okay,
on
let's.
Vomit note. I
Okay,
think
perfect.
That's great.
Great, sums it
Well,
up, really.
Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. And if you would like to hear more of these Emmy chats, you can log on to latimes.com.